Thanks for joining us for another episode of DPC Radio. This episode was recorded live in Amsterdam at the Dutch PHP Conference 2012. For more information about the Dutch PHP Conference, visit our website, phpconference.nl.
All right, so I think we better start off early, because I have so much to tell. Right, welcome. It's really nice that you found your way into my session about FLOW3, an application framework, yet another framework. My name is Robert. I am working in the Typo3 project. Typo3 is a CMS quite popular here in Europe, Germany especially, 500,000 websites done with it. And I have the great liberty to actually work full-time on FLOW3 and the next big version of the CMS. And I'm funded by the Typo3 Association, our project we founded, our association we founded for that purpose. I have two wives, and no, I have one wife and two kids. And I'm very fond of coffee. So usually all my examples contain any coffee, and it's probably also one of the reasons why I want to look at CoffeeScript at some point. So FLOW3, if you compare frameworks with each other, FLOW3 is, I tend to call it an application platform, just to invent a new name. Now the point is, if you look at Zen Framework, for example, that's rather a component library. So you have lots of separated components which you can extract from the whole part and use in your custom application. Then you have full stack frameworks which contain MVC and all that parts. And FLOW3 goes a bit further than that. We also deliver some kind of concept for your application, also how to deploy it. We have, so continuous delivery is an important topic in our case. We also have an opinion about coding style, and in general we want to make your life a bit better as a developer. So that being said, FLOW3 is a whole framework with lots of features. You cannot just extract any of these features and build your own framework, because, I mean, you also did already. You don't want to create another framework. But it's still modular and extensible. So it's really well encapsulated, and you can actually use any other component in FLOW3. So you could use a Symfony component in FLOW3 or a Zen Framework component. But we have some very special features in there which you cannot just extract. And that's not because we don't want you to, it's rather a technical thing. So we have that focus on quality, and I'm known to be a bit pedantic about it, and we can easily discuss variable names for half an hour. And I personally cannot push to master of FLOW3. We have a review system running there, so it needs some other to look at my code, because I'm also doing lots of stupid things. Well, my secret agenda is to design APIs which really, while you're working it with, put a bit of a smile on your face, because you think like, yeah, that is nicely done. And because I think if you have a tool which you enjoy working with, then you also become much more effective. At least that's what I discovered in my case. So that's kind of a bit the background. We didn't just sit there and create a new framework just to create a new framework. The idea is that we create a completely new CMS. And the idea was there 5-6 years ago, and I thought we would progress much faster. But, well, then there was this framework we also wanted to release in between. Typo3 Phoenix is the code name of the new CMS, and we plan to release the first version in October. So the cool thing is, if you create an application based on FLOW3, you can use it directly as a plugin in the new CMS, but also vice versa. So you can just take any functionality from the CMS you might like and put into your standalone application. So although FLOW3 is from the Typo3 project, it's not a CMS and it doesn't have to do anything with the CMS. It's just an application framework you can use for any other application you like. So the purpose of this session is, and you recognize that the pace is already quite fast, I want to give you an overview of many features. So it's not that you should learn that right now in this 45 minutes. So I'll introduce 11 key features of FLOW3 and show you how it's actually done. What are you laughing at? It's ugly? No. The book in the middle is one of my favorites. Anyway, that's the example I want to use, and you can actually download that example later on and look at the code. I have all that on GitHub, so if you want to experiment a bit with it. So you actually start on the command line. After you downloaded FLOW3, either the package or through Git, we have a command line tool there. So it even works on Windows, but setting up on Windows is a bit more difficult due to the nature of setting up things on Windows. It's mostly XAMPP related and setting user rights for your web server, etc. That's always a big hassle. Anyway, we have this command line tool, and so you can just type FLOW3 help, and you get a list of commands which are currently available. We think that the command line is really important because in any kind of project, you run at that to that point where you want to automate things and you need to script things, and especially we think that complete automation of the deployment is really important for the quality of your code and for the agility. So everything in the command line is really well supported. You can just ask it for help of a single command, obviously. So we have something called Kickstarter, which does some code scaffolding, generates some code for you. We have Kickstart Action Controller, for example, and this is the whole description you get there. So we try to document things in place so you don't have to look for documentation elsewhere. We try to do that well. Now, if you want to create your own commands, that is extremely easy because FLOW3's approach is that you should not configure things if it's obvious what you're trying to do. If you already have some code there and FLOW3 can analyze that code, then it should do that. You should not duplicate configuration. So, for example, in order to create this command, basically what you need is a new class, and down there you see some PHP code, the action controller command, and the rest is just comments. And FLOW3 will see, okay, you have these method arguments, they have a certain type, so it knows it's string, boolean, so booleans will be rendered as options, and there's actually no need to register this command somewhere. Why? I mean, FLOW3 knows that you wrote a class which extends a certain controller and has these method arguments, so it can just use it right away. There's nothing else you need to do. That's one of the principles which you see everywhere. And FLOW3 comes with a model view controller stack, of course. The best way to see the base functionality is taking a look at the action controller, the Hello World example. So if you look at this, this is a typical action controller in FLOW3. We are using namespaces. Actually, FLOW3 was based on PHP 6 in the beginning, but then we realized that it takes a while until that comes out. So we switched to PHP 5.3 as a requirement. So you actually extend an action controller, and then you can have an action method here. So in order to create a Hello World example, what you do is, well, just return Hello World. If you return a string, then it will be rendered directly. That's the default. So this is our Hello World example. Now, how do you pass an argument? We don't like you to configure things, so... Oh, it was already shown? No. I skipped it. So return hello world. Then you see it in the next example. So here, you see that we have $name there, and it is passed to this action. So FLOW3 will check the param string annotation there, and now what I do is I use a template instead of returning the string directly. So this would be a very simple template. We have our own templating engine called Fluid, and now if you pass the name here, it will pass to the template. You can also pass some other data structures, an array, for example, or objects. And then what you need to do is, in your template, you can use some kind of JavaScript syntax, data.name, in order to access these properties. There's a lot to tell about why we created our own templating engine, but anyway, it's object-oriented. It doesn't allow PHP for cleanliness reasons, and it's very flexible. So that would be the Hello World example with an argument. Now, the Fluid template engine is basically valid HTML, which you could validate because we extend the namespace, and you can even generate some schema which you can import into your IDE, PHP Storm, for example, and then you actually have auto-completion and documentation and everything in place, even with the custom additions you made to the templating engine. So here you see a few examples. That's a lot of example code here, but you have actually loops, so you can loop over an array or an iterator or something which implements array access. And then you have a new variable book available, which you can use here, for example, in this if condition. So if this book contains an image, then we render an image tag, and the URI should be rendered by something called a view helper, which can render links to resources. So that's just a bit more complex example to get you some idea of how this syntax looks like in FLOW3. The key part, though, of your application are the models. So FLOW3 has the attitude that you should not concentrate on all the infrastructural parts, security and logging and caching, and you don't want to implement that again and again. Personally, for me, what's most fun is meeting with a customer and learning about his job, his software he needs, trying to figure out what solution does he need. So I'd rather like to work on the actual business logic and not so much on making my application secure. So that is really the basic design principle we have for FLOW3, to let you focus on the actual business logic. That's also where the name comes from. We want to actually put you in a flow experience so that you actually don't have to switch forth and back just to get something running. Now, the models are the important bit, and the models are really clean in FLOW3. So you don't need to extend any base class. You have some properties there. You can write any code into a model. Actually, it's not only getters and setters. So if you know the domain model pattern, that says there shouldn't be only properties in a model. There should actually be functionality. So in a conference model, for example, you could have a postpone method, which would be quite complex. But that makes your model more useful. And you need to sit down with your customer and draw some diagrams and see what really reflects his problem and put that into models. So we do have some getters and setters here, though. Essentially, we need that. And now, somehow that needs to be established in the database, of course. The problem is, when I'm being asked, like, is it easy to learn FLOW3, then I ask, how much experience do you have with PHP and other frameworks? And if he says, well, I'm fairly new to PHP, then I say, then it's fairly easy to learn FLOW3 because you don't have to forget so much. The problem is we are really used to, if you're programming PHP for 8 years or something, then you think in terms of database tables, and even while you're sitting at the customer, you already design your structure and join tables and all that. But it restricts you. You cannot really concentrate on the problem. So FLOW3 takes all that and creates the database structure for you. This would be the database structure for a book. So you have category, title, price, description, image there. And also some identifier. So that is also one of the first questions someone asks. How can I get an identifier into my model? Or how can I access that? Because in this book model here, you see, we have title and a constructor and so on. We don't have an identifier property. Usually you don't need one. And it doesn't appear in the domain of your customer. It's a technical thing. The framework needs to keep track of things and to render certain links. We're not using auto-incremented identifiers, by the way. We're using UUIDs. Because as we're going to create a CMS or created a CMS, we have the task that we need to keep track of content between different installations and sources. So if you have auto-incremented IDs and create new content here and new content there and then try to synchronize them, then you have conflicts. And UUIDs are globally unique, so every model persisted by FLOW3 gets a UUID automatically. Now, if you look at some actual data, you see here the titles, description, and this would be a typical UUID generated. If you really need to, you can even access the identifier. There are functions for getting the identifier. If you create something low level, some import-export functionality, of course you can access it. But it's a good practice to start thinking with models without the identifier. And you can find the book easily by the title, or you can find it by the ISBN. The ISBN would be a very natural identifier for a book. And all that concepts are part of something called domain-driven design, which is not a programming technique, but it's really a mind shift, because it also changes the way you approach projects, how you work with your customer. And I've mentioned a few parts of that. That would also take a whole day to tell you more about domain-driven design. But actually, the purpose we follow in FLOW3 is to have very clean models, a clean domain, no infrastructure code in there, no database queries in there, and the framework does the rest. So somewhere these books need to be stored. And now, for this purpose, we have repositories. A repository is just a class which is your connection to the database world. So in the model, you don't need any database-related code. There shouldn't also be security-related code. There should only be code which is natural to the domain of your customer. The repository is a class which has functions like add, remove, find by title, find by identifier. And there you can actually even create custom SQL queries or some other object-oriented form of searching. The good thing is that you centralize all your database queries at one place. And all client code is only using the API functions you put into that repository. So if you want to optimize your data structure or optimize the queries, you only have to do that at a central point. You don't have to change any client code which uses this repository. Well, there's a lot to be said about domain-driven design. I can really recommend reading one of these two books, or both. Well, the left one is the original, Introducing Domain-Driven Design. It's a bit to read like one of these patterns books, so it takes a while to get through it. It's not really a fun story to read. And the right one is actually quite entertaining to read, and also combines this whole model of domain-driven design with patterns, singleton pattern and proxy pattern and all that. The examples are in C# and .NET, but that really doesn't matter if you want to go into that topic. So I mentioned that somehow these objects need to end up in the database naturally. So that whole complex is called persistence. We created our own ORM solution in the beginning, but fortunately, in the meantime, there is a nice solution, Doctrine, Doctrine 2 specifically, which does all that. So Doctrine is a mapper which can put your objects into a database and back, and also has lots of optimization, lazy loading, for example. So if I query my repository, find me all books from the last 2 years, I probably get some 1,000 books back, but they are not actually loaded, they are lazy loaded. So only if you access the title of a specific book, that one book is loaded. And that's something Doctrine does for us. By default, Doctrine requires you to configure a lot, and you've seen that we are using some configuration here in the comments, and that are annotations. In other programming languages, that is part of the actual language, but in PHP, we don't have that, so there's a convention that we're using comments for it. And there's even some kind of syntax standard which evolves at the moment, so all projects will going to use the same syntax for annotations. Now, this annotation here from Doctrine tells that this title should be a varchar of 255 characters, and this price here should be an integer, and so on. Now, in the attitude of FLOW3, that is redundant information, because we could say that by default, a string would be a varchar 255 characters. And we also have a var annotation here for integer, so there's no need to duplicate that information again. That's why you can just leave out these annotations when you have a FLOW3 application. And we fall back to some defaults based on code analysis and so on. But of course, you can, if you want to optimize your application, always add any Doctrine annotation again and choose a different field format. There's lots more, for example, table inheritance. So if you have a class and a subclass, what should Doctrine do with it? Should it create 2 tables or put everything in one table with all the fields? It's a complex topic, and you just need to learn it. That is very well documented in the Doctrine manuals, but it's a bit of a hard time to get started with this thinking. Anyway, the question now is, how do we create a new object and put it into the database? Now, the new action here is fairly empty. There's no code. When FLOW3 executes an action and there's nothing returned, then it will automatically select a template which fits to the controller and action and just render that. For the new action, we only need to display a form, one like this. And so the template more or less looks like what you see at the right-hand side here. So there's just the action and some input fields. And now these arguments here are passed to the create action. You see, the name of each element here is new book and then the property name. And new book is the argument name in the create action. So if you look at the create action again, you see here's new book. And I just create a form which passes an array of properties to the create action. But the create action expects an object, not an array. So if you code this by hand, you will have the post superglobal with all the properties sent. You need to sanitize them, you need to validate them, and eventually you need to create some object. FLOW3 does that for you. We have some mechanism in place called property mapping, which is really a lot configurable and all that if you need to. But by default, FLOW3 will detect that a book is expected here. And I get some properties which fit to this book model. So FLOW3 will create a new book and set the properties and pass it to your create action. And these values are already validated. So you could actually say, I'm requiring a certain string length, etc. And your action will only be called if that is all validated. So for this book example or shop example, you need something else. You want to upload images. And that also is quite a hassle usually when you do that manually. The files array in PHP is really a masterpiece. That is, I mean, the sort grouping in there, that really doesn't make sense. So then what about if something wrong is submitted or a different file type than you expect? And where do you store that? What if you have content delivery networks and need to publish that again? So dealing with files directly is always a big hassle. That's why we have some resource management in place. So a package, FLOW3 can have any amount of packages, some you create. A package can have public resources and private resources. Private resources would be templates, for example, which you don't publish to the website. In the public resources, you have your CSS, images, etc. Now, if you install FLOW3, there's only one directory which is accessible from outside, a web directory. All your code and packages will be outside the web document root. So by default, nobody can access anything. And FLOW3 will mirror your public resources to that web directory. So if you look at this web folder, there's a resources folder, static, packages, Twitter Bootstrap. And what you can see here, this is a symbolic link pointing to your original package. So we are using symbolic links, which is also why we don't support, which is one of the two reasons why we don't support Windows XP. The other one is, hey, it's 11 years old, but people are still complaining about it. So we create symbolic links for that purpose. Now, if you upload something, we store that in a data directory and use the SHA-1 hash of the content as a file name internally. You never need to deal with that directly. So that means if you upload the exact same thing again, you will still only have one file. And internally, FLOW3 gives you access to these resources by resource objects. So you never get a file name or something if you don't really want, I mean, you can find out the file name, but usually you work with resource objects. And these resources are also mirrored, and to the persistent web directory. And the URL created actually looks a bit ugly, but then again, it has also a good end for the search engines, which is the original file name. Well, in fact, you can type anything you like at the last part. It will always load the same resource. That is just a cosmetic thing for downloads and for search engines. The resource management can do a lot of things. Content delivery network is one of them. So it can publish your files to Amazon S3 or something else, and you don't need to change your client code for that. It also can do secure resources. So it can generate directories and symbolic links which are bound to a user session. So you can only download certain things while you're logged in, or you can only download them once or something like that. Well, in 2006 or 2007, I think, I gave my first talk about dependency injection, and it was really hard to get that into a PHP conference. Because they thought like, yeah, that's, I mean, it's other programming languages are doing that. PHP doesn't really need that. And now it's, fortunately, has become quite popular, not because I spoke so much about it. In our community now, everybody knows it, in Type 3 community, but many frameworks are adopting it. So just as a small catch-up, what that means, dependency injection. This is the ugly singleton pattern. Who has recently used this singleton pattern? I, for writing this. So the idea is that foo might be a service or a repository or controller or whatever, and you want to make sure that it only exists once. You only get one unique instance. So you need a well-known place where you can get that one instance. And the singleton pattern, one of the implementations says, let's ask the class directly and make it a static instance property here. So bar depends on foo and asks foo to get the instance. Well, there are lots of problems with that. First thing is, if you want to test this and you want to unit test this, then you usually want to mock objects which you don't want to test at this moment. So you cannot mock foo because foo is hard-coded here. You cannot change it. The other thing is, what if I implement a better foo? I cannot replace that. I need to change bar as well. So I have a very tight coupling of these two code parts. There's one way to get around this, and that's the service locator pattern. So now bar depends on service locator and asks service locator to get foo. That's a bit better, but on the other hand, now you depend on the service locator, and you still cannot test it because this call to get foo is hard-coded again. And then some came up to create a service locator which has a testable mode. So you can set a flag, and then only during unit tests it will behave differently, and that's really ugly. So FLOW3 has support for dependency injection and object management. So dependency injection means we reverse or we inverse the control over the dependency. Bar should not be responsible of getting the instance, but we should just pass it an instance from outside. Then we are much more flexible. And in FLOW3, we have all the objects under control. So we don't ask you to write some configuration which registers certain classes to be covered by dependency injection or object management. By default, everything is monitored by FLOW3. So you don't want to do that because we can we can analyze your code, so we can see if you need certain dependencies or not. And now the first question you might ask, man, this must be really slow because we analyze a lot of code. Well, we do that, if you run that in production context, we do that exactly once, and then it's compiled into hard-coded PHP very, very efficiently, probably more efficient than you could write it by hand. So actually, yeah, I'll show you the example of constructor injection now. They are faster than me. So constructor injection means I pass the service to the constructor and then use it here. You can do that manually if you like, but FLOW3 will analyze this and do that automatically. Setter injection means you just pass the dependency to a setter, but you can also call it inject, and then FLOW3 will do that automatically for you. A third way would be property injection. So you just say, I need this service here in this property, add some inject annotation, and then it will happen. So there's no need to have additional configuration. Sessions. If you want to have a shop, you need a shopping basket. So what do? We still have scopes. So we have a singleton scope, something only exists once, or prototype scope. You can have many of them. And we have a third scope, session. So you just say basket should have session scope. And when I call the add book method, a new session should be started. Now, you see in the log even what code triggered a new session. And then in your controller, you can just inject this basket to a property. And throughout the whole session, you will always get the same basket with the same content. So that's all you need to do in order to implement a shopping basket. And you can read that in the example when you download them. Well, finally, we have security. So you can just create a new book here. You see there's a link. Of course, we want to not allow everybody to do that. We have something in place which uses some code rewriting, etc. So what you basically do is you define a resource. So you use a pattern which covers dangerous methods, for example. Then you define some roles, and then you can set the access control list features here. Say administrators are allowed to execute dangerous methods. And automatically, anybody else won't be allowed to call that method. So we intercept method calls in PHP and force you to log in or show some access denied exception. So when you're logged in, the code, the link will look like this because we add some token here to protect you from CSRF, from cross-site request forgery attacks. And if you're not logged in, you'll get some exception, but this is a debugging exception, obviously, and in production it will look a bit different. Well, this is implemented with a feature, and that's the last topic I'm showing, aspect-oriented programming, which is usually not doable in PHP because it must be a language feature, really. So what you can do with that is, if you take the hello world example, you have the index action here with name passed. Now you want to modify this method. Unfortunately, you cannot touch the code directly because maybe it's in a component you loaded from elsewhere. You want to still have the option to upgrade it later on. So what you do is, with aspects, you can modify the behavior of methods from outside by defining patterns and something called an advice. So if I call that hello world method, obviously I see hello Robert, and now I can create a new class called presentation aspect. I add some annotation here. I create a method which should be called, and here I define a pattern where this, which defines when this method here should be called. So I try to intercept the index action of the hello controller. And then I get the name argument from that method and return some other string, and by that, the original method is not called anymore. So that was just a simple example of AOP. If you ask yourself, is anybody else using FLOW3 already? Because last year in October, we had the 1.0 release. Yes, besides me, there are a couple of companies. So German's second biggest drugstore, they created a customer database based on FLOW3 directly before Christmas, which gave us some interesting time in improving performance for FLOW3. It's based on CouchDB, actually. It acts as a middleware. They have millions of customers and thousands of requests per second. So that works quite well. Then currently, there's a project going on by Amadeus, the world's biggest e-ticket provider. They created a new product which covers social media and stuff. And they are working with lots of teams. Actually, I could convert a few Java developers they were using in-house to PHP and introduce FLOW3 to them, which had the nice effect that some other developers from other departments wanted to be transferred to that department because they had so much fun working with FLOW3. So we have some 4 minutes left. If you have any questions, that would be the right time to ask them.
Let me be the first one. Which version of Doctrine is FLOW3 alive?
The most recent, Doctrine 2, obviously, that's a complete different product than Doctrine 1. Yeah, and we are using the most recent one because, so I don't know which one is currently stable, because we also provide a lot of patches to Doctrine. Benjamin Eberlei, one of the core developers, is hanging around with us most of the time, and we can add some cool stuff there.
Okay, but is there created a wrapper around Doctrine in FLOW3, or is Doctrine used plain in Flow?
It is kind of used plain. It's used as a regular package, but what we have on top is we enhance the annotation driver so that we set certain annotations based on our code analysis. And yeah, and we just improve the basic configuration a bit. But you can use any feature of Doctrine like plain Doctrine.
Well, I have a question about that because I saw that in your repositories you also added entities, and that's something that Doctrine does not do by default. The entity manager is for that.
Yeah.
And DQL also likes an insert statement. So,
yeah.
But you adopted the domain-driven design approach. Is that do the repositories still inherit from the Doctrine repository?
Not from, we have a persistence manager which inherits or uses the entity manager of Doctrine. And we have a base repository which allows you to use a simplified query object model or use directly DQL queries. But usually you don't need to access any of the Doctrine internals like the entity manager because we try to provide that for you. You can, however...
So you added a repository layer that's not the Doctrine repository.
Exactly. So in the end, you can control transactions and all that if you like, but the default is that we try to do that. Yes?
Two questions actually. The Doctrine is stable with Oracle, or since
I've been told that yes, and for Oracle, yeah. That's right, yeah. So apart from that, I cannot really tell from experience, but we added some things. Oracle doesn't support full name table names, for example. So we added a feature to Doctrine which shortens table names and adds a hash as the end. So we are aware of many problems Oracle usually has. Personally, I have not tried it yet with Oracle, to be honest. But we want to support it in a way if there's someone really using it. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
The annotations, do they have auto-completion on PHP?
They don't have autocompletion in PHP yet, but it's very probable that they will have something like that in the future because we take the effort to standardize this, and it's based on PHP classes. You can write your own annotations very easily.
Sure, but for the default,
Exactly. So currently we don't have autocompletion.
okay. So, but it's work in progress.
Yeah.
With Five.
Actually, they're really respondent, the JetBrains guys. We asked them to implement restructured text support also for PHP Storm, and we do that. Yes?
Why did you decide to support the annotations for database mappings? Because if you really want to separate your model and your database, I think you should write them in YAML or XML.
You can. Actually, you can. On the other hand, we think that this is the closest part to the code. So when I change the code, I might forget to update the configuration. And so this is why we say we don't use annotations for any kind of configuration. That would be stupid. But if it's closely coupled to the design of your code, if you change integer to string and so on.
Okay, but I want my developers who are working on the model not to be distracted by the database. So if you leave the annotation mappings for the database in the code, they're still there.
Yeah, so you can override that by some other configuration. On the other hand, from experience, it also means when you do optimizations, you also have to touch some code to get more efficient queries and so on. So, which doesn't usually apply to models. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Whoa, so many questions. Cool. Yeah, you would.
How are you guys implementing this AOP stuff? If I look at what you show on the screen, it looks like you're compiling the PHP.
We are. We're actually compiling things. In a development context, we have even some more file monitoring going on. So just in PHP, which means it's a bit slower while you're developing. It will detect changes and recompile things in the background. We use a sub-process for that. It's actually as clean as it can be. But of course, we are extending PHP in a way which it never was meant to be. But it works fine. So we use this for 5 years now, although we only have the first release now. But we have had so many iterations internally, and it feels quite good to work with it. There was one.
Yeah, templating. Is it possible to add your own tags or functions, and how would you do that?
Yes, extremely easy. You create something called a view helper, which is a specialized controller, basically. And so you can just create a new controller which introduces new methods, new arguments. It even can have some Ajax states automatically, and will soon support edge side includes, so you can render them as a standalone widget. That's extremely easy. You can even use your complete own templating engine if you like. So, great. Thanks a lot also for the questions. I'm always very happy for questions. If you try it out and want to give me some feedback, I really appreciate it, especially like 2 weeks in the future or something, if you really tried something with it. The code examples are on GitHub. If you want to download it, we have an IRC channel. We will gladly help you get started. And so enjoy FLOW3, and thanks for listening.
DPC Radio is a production of iBuildings. The materials presented are copyright of the speakers. This episode is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 2.0 license. iBuildings is a full-service web development company specializing in PHP development. For more information on how we can help you with your next web project, visit our site at ibuildings.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us again for DPC Radio.